My name is Bobby Herrera. I am the CEO and co-founder of Populus Group and the author of the book, The Gift of Struggle. Today, we're going to be talking about how to confront the bias that exists on both sides of social injustice, how to win any race, no matter what race you're in, despite how you feel the odds may be stacked against you, and perhaps above all, how to give with dignity.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of Leadership Excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Hey, would you do me a quick favor? Send me a note, DM me on one of the 4 social media, the big ones, and just let me know, what platform do you listen to us on? Is it Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio? However it is that you listen, tell us. And why don't you, in that message that you send to me, let me know one of your favorite episodes and why you really love that one. And I'm going to pick a winner and offer a prize of about $1,500. So that will be nice. All right, let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Is it possible that you have forgotten the gifts you may have been given through the struggles that you've encountered? What do you think would happen if you recognized and shared those gifts with those that you serve? Moreover, what if you had a way to genuinely see the gifts to be found in the struggles that you're facing right now, today? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Simply go to dovbaron.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, and your soul has been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some truly delicious conversations with some, and deeply meaningful, with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about astronauts, we're talking about neuroscientists. It's really fabulous. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both shows on all the usual outlets, and we need your help in staying relevant. So please get over to wherever you listen to the show from, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we're honored to and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. If you are listening on one of those podcasts and one of those outlets, we want to say thank you for sharing the show with everybody. We sincerely appreciate it. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. We got a lot to cover today. So first off, we need to consider examining what might be the gift offered to you through the struggles you're finding yourself in right now. We've all got struggles. As we record this, it's the end of 2021. We're approaching almost 2 full years of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and the fallout from it. Aside from devastating amount of people around the world who've been desperately ill and died, there is also the economic impact of the breakdown of the supply chain. And to punctuate that, approximately 20 million people in the US, that's alone, it's more than that, but just in the US alone, have resigned from their jobs in the last 12 months. This has left organizations scrambling to find new talent and to keep the talent that they have, particularly while borders are closed and many of the temporary workers are unavailable to fill those gaps. So what do you do? Let's find out together, because our guest today is Bobby Herrera, who is, at his core, a man who believes that everyone deserves the opportunity to succeed. He is a front row fan of the underdog. He's an Army vet and a student of struggle. He is the co-founder and CEO of Populus Group, one of the fastest growing HR service companies in the United States, with an annual revenue of 500 million and many of the Fortune 10 as his customers. He serves on national community organization boards and is a regular speaker at corporations and service groups. If you believe that one moment can transform someone's story, today you're going to hear about one that will stick with you forever and inspire you to become the leader that you imagine yourself to be. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the author of The Gift of Struggle, Mr. Bobby Herrera. And the crowd goes mad.
Hell, the underdogs, Dove. I feel like I want a shadow box now.
Ooh, getting in there. All right. So, Bobby, where we always like to start the show is with this question. In the context of leadership development and leadership generally, you know, I'm brought in, I know you are, you're asked to come and speak. I'm brought in, oftentimes I'm asked a question and I feel like it's the wrong question. So I can't give the right answer to the wrong question. So in the context of leadership and development, what is the question we should be looking for the answers to that oftentimes we're not even aware that we should be looking? What do you see it as?
Wow, great question, Dove. You know, I do agree. I think the right questions open doors that otherwise remain closed. You know, in my observation, Dove, I think the first and foremost, the key question is, you know, hey, who am I becoming? And, you know, it starts first and foremost with becoming that leader that you imagine inside. And what does that journey not only look like, but where is it going? And two, like, how am I going to check what I call the ultimate box? Like, I believe every single one of us want to check the ultimate box. And that ultimate box is, will my life matter? So how are we going to make a mark on this world? How are we going to leave it a little bit better than when we arrived? And I believe those two questions must be asked in order to really understand not only who we are, but how we want to give to the world.
Yes, that's. I have a very similar philosophy. Don't use that language, but I really like that because I think that, you know, it's interesting to me that, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on be present in the moment. And I fully agree with that. I think we do need to be very present in the moment, but not at the cost of examining where am I going? Because if I'm present in the moment, but I'm on the wrong path for my heart, for my soul, for my imagining of the kind of leader that I want to be, then it doesn't matter that I'm present. I'm present in the wrong place. You know, if you're present in the North Pole and you're looking to get a suntan, you might want to move south. That's just a thought, you know. So it's kind of like that, and I really like the way you put that. That's really good. Who am I becoming, and can I check that ultimate box? Now, you come from a large family, as I believe you're one of 13 kids, I think it is, and your family are a migrant family. I think that this is a very relevant conversation at this point in time, because, you know, my family, my heritage is also an immigrant family who came to another country. I'm an immigrant myself. I've immigrated twice to two separate countries from the country I was born in. My family, my grandparents are, you know, from Eastern Europe and moved around, all those kinds of things. And there's an ethic that goes along with, we all know the ethic of the immigrants, and that we all know that immigrants take for granted far less than sort of homegrown people. We tend to appreciate what's in front of us and we want to take advantage of that. But there's also a value of hard work that is, to me, is kind of, it's interesting when I see anti-immigrant things, because it's like the hardest workers are always the immigrants, and their likelihood of becoming millionaires is also higher. So you must have grown up with hard workers of value, putting in hard, long hours. You guys, your family started out working in the fields. Talk to us about how that has influenced you as a leader, and what that has done for you, that migrant mentality?
Well, a little background of, so I'm number
Thank you.
11 of 13. So I still eat with my elbows on the table. I protect my food, and I learned to do that very young. It was a, it was a necessity.
I
You know,
understand.
it's interesting on the, hard work is a value. Yeah, it absolutely was, and it was very directly connected to necessity. And I believe that's often part of the immigrant journey. And my family story, my dad was a bracero from Mexico that came over to the US as a very young man, and he would leave the family 10 years while my mother was in Mexico raising children. And in those days, there was no form of communication.
No.
And then when my
Wasn't
family,
like you could hop online.
that's right. And when my family migrated to the US, then that journey transformed us becoming a migrant farm working family. And so from my earliest memories, my dad he'd pull all the kids out of school in April. And then we would start our journey through the Southwest and through the Western part of the United States, going from where I was raised in New Mexico to then working in the onion fields in Colorado, working in the sugar beets in Wyoming, working in the potato and picking pears and apples in Idaho. And then we'd make our way all the way back down to work a final season in Wyoming and Colorado. And then he would re-enroll us back in school in mid-September. So 6 months out of the year, that's how I grew up in my formidable years. And what's interesting, Dove, as I reflect on that journey, I wouldn't trade it for the world now. One, because it was packed with lesson after lesson after lesson of who it helped me become.
Of course.
However, the level of appreciation that I have now for others that had to either go through similar journeys or have similar story, I'm fascinated by those stories because of the person that forms on the inside. And as a young man, I didn't know any different. No. But as I've matured, I reflect, and I'm so grateful for that time in my life and how it forms such a strong foundation for me.
When you look at that, and I mean, when we come from big immigrant or migrant families, I do too. So when you come from those, there's a lot of things that are missing. I mean, we look at life today and we go, there's a lot of things we're saying. I'm not talking about the internet, and I'm not talking about even games or online games or anything, but just a lot of things that are missing. I mean, when your mom and your dad are working, like my mom worked 3 jobs, when you do stuff like that, there's a lot, the kids miss out on a lot. And I think that's real. And I don't want to in any way minimize that, because I know it sucked for me, the things I missed. There's no doubt about that. It sucked hard. And at the same time, it's not one-sided. It's not all bad. And it is, as you said, by the title of your book, it is the gift of the struggle. But we have a tendency, and this makes me very cautious. We have a tendency to make it all good or make it all bad. So, oh, my parents were shit. They never gave me any attention or any love. And, and we only had meat on every other 14 months or whatever it was, and it's tough, and I get it. Right. And it's all horrible and bad. Or, oh, it's all good. It was all fantastic. And I loved it. And, no, you didn't. You just wanted a day off. So talk to us about balancing that for you, Bobby, because I know you would have had to balance that as you've gotten older.
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree. The danger of a single story, one spectrum, one side of the spectrum or the other, there's too much of that. And growing up and reflecting on it, Dove, I mean, I had some marker moments that I share in the book, like once I entered the military, that really helped me start reframing my story and seeing that balance. Because I too was very one-sided in that I lacked hope. I had more reverse role models than I cared to admit as I was growing up. I had extreme modesty from, an economics perspective. And so there were a lot of things missing that many other kids that I grew up with took for granted. But it was when I finally started recognizing in my 20s, as I was, I think, starting to grow up a little bit, far from, far from my frontal lobe developing, of course,
Sure.
but is when I started seeing that, wow, like this is actually an advantage for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like some of the things that other people are really grasping to understand, I've done it tenfold.
Right.
And this can accelerate my climb per se. And, I often use a mountain as a metaphor. One, I'm passionate about the mountains, but as, we talked about in the beginning, I believe we're all climbing our own mountain.
Of
There's a
course.
place that we all imagine that looks and feels better than where we are today. And so it's about finding directionally how we get there. And it's usually those painful moments in our life that gave us the strength to encounter the next inevitable painful moment. Because
Yes.
there's no doubt that it's not if, it's when. They're coming.
Definitely. Now, one of the things you talked about was, the military, and you talked about having these reverse role models. Oftentimes I've been asked that question myself when somebody said to me, who was your greatest inspiration? In an interview I did in 1990, I think it was, on a radio station. And I said, oh, my father. And they go, oh, was your father a great spiritual man? And I go, no, my father was a godless, spiritualless narcissist. He was a great inspiration about what not to be. And people didn't understand that in those days, but that made me go, I need to be good at relationship. I need to understand people, and I need to be considerate and compassionate of other people. He was a great reverse model. You had all those, yet you decided to go into the military as a migrant. Was that a deliberate path? Was that something you saw as a way out? Was it something you saw as how did you sort of frame that for yourself? Because a lot of people would go, I'm not joining the military. God, those people are going to work me just as hard as the family. I want some downtime. Or they go, well, this is a way for a green card or whatever it is, so what was it for you?
It was twofold. The one, my dad, early in Mexico as a young man, he had a burning desire to join the armed forces in Mexico.
Oh.
And he was unable to because of family hardship. And when I was growing up, my dad would tell me that story. And often when I heard my dad tell that story or, reflect on it somehow, it's like I could feel there was a void in his heart. And there's just something about how he made me feel that I connected with when he would tell that story. So first and foremost, when I did it, and I tell this story at length in the book where, I joined and I did it first and foremost to complete his dream.
Oh, wow.
And second, I knew that I had seen several of my older siblings try to go to college, try to make it out of our small town, make it through, our poverty per se, and struggle immensely and eventually end up quitting and never making it through. And I said, you know what? I'm not gonna do it that way. And so I joined the Army, but I had a strong desire to serve. I think a lot of my veteran brothers and I, it's like, we're wired in a way to where we run towards gunfire. And I was always wired that way as a young man. And I just had such a strong desire to serve, but it was for those two driving reasons, for my dad's dream and to help get myself a ticket to a better climb.
Right. Now, one of the things that I know you're a big advocate of minorities, but also veteran entrepreneurs, veteranpreneurs as they're now becoming more known.
Mhm.
And the bias against minorities, the bias against migrants, that's glaring. I mean, if
Mhm.
somebody says that doesn't exist, I think they're smoking a fat one personally, but that's
Mhm.
my opinion.
Right.
But then, but you're a big advocate for them and for veteran entrepreneurs. So in the context of our viewers and our listeners, what do you
Mhm.
see as the bias that the business world and leaders need to confront when it comes to both of these groups? Like, what do they need to? What is the bias they got to see? Because I think they've got a blind spot around it.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate because I do agree, Dove. It exists, and it exists more than I believe, organizations want to admit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also believe that in many cases it's unintentional. Um,
Yes.
and when we really start to unpack it, I know if I'm having a conversation with a CEO that I'm talking directly about this with, or I'm coaching, I'll often zoom out and have him or her zoom out, and I'll ask them, "Hey, walk me through what the attributes that matter most to you in anyone that becomes a member of the community that you're trying to build. Like for anyone to get selected to become a part of your community, like tell me what those core attributes are." And most times I'll get them to the core of, people that can build trust,
Yep.
people that have those values that matter. And once I help them start connecting those to the stories of what many veterans, what many minorities go through, then all of a sudden their narrative starts changing in that, wow, maybe instead of trying to do the right thing and hire a minority or a veteran per se to help them, maybe instead I tell them you should do it to help yourself. So I always encourage these CEOs or these leaders, like don't do them a favor, do yourself a favor, because many of them have the attributes that matter, and shift in that for them to look at it from what matters most to them has been a very effective exercise for me with some of these leaders that struggle with that.
That's a great turnaround because, there is this social justice and social responsibility piece. And I'm not saying it's in any way it's wrong.
Mhm.
I think, we need to be a lot more aware of it. But your way of looking at it, which is, particularly in the context of hard
Mhm.
work or of values, is particularly like, here's a way to get over your bias, mate.
Mhm.
You want people who've got values, right? Yeah. What
Mhm.
kind of values? X, Y, and Z. All right. Where do you think you'd find those most? We're going to find those in people who've been repressed. You're going to find those in people who've had to fight,
Mhm.
right? Not people who were standing around waiting for a certificate for showing up for the game, right? No, people who actually fought hard to get in the game. They're the people who are going to be values driven. They're the ones who are going to be hardworking. Oh, yeah, never thought about that. Yeah. And meanwhile, you keep giving your cousin a job. You're like, come on, wake
Right.
the heck up. Right.
Right.
These people have got, I mean, that's a great way of understanding it for people to grasp. This is your advantage, not theirs. Wakey, wakey, eggs and
Correct.
bakey. Yeah, that's
That's right.
fantastic.
That's right. And I think there's also an interesting alternate narrative to that too, Dove, where like I do a lot of storytelling to
Mm-hmm.
what I call kids born on the wrong side of the opportunity divide, kids that look like me. And um, also, these veterans. And there's often a narrative that comes from them that rolls something like, I have all these disadvantages. I have
Yes.
all these obstacles in front of me. And, I was speaking to a group of urban youth, fellow underdog kids in
Mm-hmm.
Seattle a while back. And at the end of the session, when I finished with the storytelling, there'd been a young man that was sitting on the front. There were about 200 students there, and he had caught my eye. He was dressed sharp. It's a young African American student, And he had, I don't know if you're a Seattle Seahawks, fan or not, but he had the some nice looking dreads, and he was looking really sharp, and he was hanging on every word. And at the end, during the Q&A, that's my favorite part because I get to really connect with these kids.
Yeah.
And I got a couple of layup questions, and then this kid finally raised his hand, and he asked me. He said, "Hey, Bobby, as you were getting started in your career, like, how did you get past the color thing?"
Mm-hmm.
And I knew what he was really asking me, Doug, but I wanted a creative way to drive it home. So I looked at him and I said, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you a question first before we answer that?" He's like, "Sure." And I said, "You're a pretty athletic looking young man." I said, "Do you think you could beat me in a race?" And he looked at me, obviously not knowing where this question from left field came from.
Yeah.
And I said, he looked at me and he's like, "Of course." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Hey, do you mind if I call you Skittles? Because you got that whole Marshawn Lynch thing going, and you're looking really sharp." And his friend started laughing because that was actually his nickname.
Oh, cool.
And so I said, "Hey, come on up. Come on up on the stage." I said, "You and I are going to race across the stage right now. And I'm going to prove to you that I can beat you in a race." And of course, the kids started getting all excited and so forth. And I called him up and we walked over to the side of the stage. It was a pretty long, but short stage. It was going to be a short race. And I had the gal that introduced me go to the other side. And as we're sitting there, my man Skittles is getting down like he's going to, steal second base. Like there's no way he's letting this old man beat him in front of all his friends. Right. And so as the race gets started, as we get there, the gal, I told her, "Hey, go ahead and start us." And she says, "On your mark, get set." And right before she said go, I put my hand out in front of this young man. And I stepped out in front of him and I said, "Hey, let me ask you something. What were you thinking about when you were on that line?" And he looked at me and said, "Beating you." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Now let me ask you another question. Did you care what color I was?" And he said, "No." And then he just grinned from ear to ear, Doug. And I said, "Hey, look, I know what question you were really asking me. I'm not saying that the color thing is not real. I'm not saying that all these things that are out that are uncontrollable, by the way, aren't something that you're going to face. But here's what I want you to leave with. From this day forward, you have control over your story, over your choices, and over how hard you run." And so I said, you asked me your question about how do I get over the color thing, but your real question is, how do I best take control of my own story? And I said, next time you're on that line, and no matter what race you run, doesn't matter who the person is to the left or right of you, you just run your best race and you run the next one better than that one. And that young man to this day will never forget that moment. And I think more often than not, the message that I send to these kids born on the wrong side of the opportunity divide is, look, these things out here, they're uncontrollable. But what is controllable is the story that you can control and the choices you make. Raise your standards every time you line up. And if we do those two, Dove, I think we'll eventually get to that place where we all want to get to. But it's not just one-sided. And I'm always real intentional about making sure that we look at both sides of the narrative, because it's an and, not an or.
Yeah, absolutely. Superb. Thank you for that. That was a brilliant story and a brilliant way of understanding that the issues are still the issues. Nobody's saying they're not the issues,
right?
But the focus is up to you. What you're determining is the focus. And the truth is, because of the narrative of the political environment or whatever it might be, you might, because the argument could easily be, well, I'm starting 3 yards back, then run 3 yards harder.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
That's what you have control over.
Yeah.
So that's fabulous. Thank you, Bobby. I really appreciate that. We are already at the end of part 1 of our show. I'm really enjoying it. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for all that you're sharing with our audience. I really would like to make sure that everybody knows how to get a hold of you, where they can reach out to you and tap into all the resources that you have to offer. If you would please share that with our audience before we end part 1 and come back in one click for part 2.
Yeah, I'm most active on LinkedIn, so I can be followed on LinkedIn. That's where I generously share a lot of the wisdom that's been shared with me over the years. And my website is bobby-herrera.com. Do a lot of active storytelling there.
Okay, fabulous. We'll make sure, of course, that all of the links are posted in the show notes. And remember that we're just going to be one click away for part 2. But until then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about the gift struggle has brought you. We'll be back in one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.